The November wind howled across the Texas plains like a wounded animal, and Marlena Zimmerman stood shivering on the empty road outside San Angelo with nothing but the thin cotton dress she had worn to her wedding that morning. Her husband of 6 hours, Gerald Pritchard, had thrown her from the moving stage coach after discovering she had no money hidden away, no secret inheritance, nothing but herself to bring to their union, and apparently that was not enough for a man who had courted her with pretty lies and false promises. The stage disappeared into the darkening afternoon, leaving her alone on a stretch of road where the temperature was dropping fast, and the first hints of an unseasonable cold front were turning the sky an ominous shade of gray. She wrapped her arms around herself and started walking toward the distant lights of town, her feet already aching in the delicate shoes she had thought would carry her into a new life, not leave her stranded like discarded refuse on the side of a lonely road. She had made it perhaps half a mile when the cold truly began to bite, seeping through the fabric of her dress and making her teeth chatter so hard she thought they might crack. Marlena had grown up in Louisiana, where winter meant mild days and cool nights, not this bone-deep chill that seemed to freeze the very marrow in her bones. Her mother had died 3 years ago, her father 2 months past, and she had accepted Gerald's proposal because the alternative was working in the textile mill until her hands bled and her lungs filled with cotton dust. Now she wondered if the mill might not have been the better choice after all. At least she would have had a roof over her head and a bed to sleep in, however hard. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, hope and fear warring in her chest. A single rider was approaching from the direction of town, sitting easy in the saddle despite the wind that was now whipping across the plain with real fury. As he drew closer, she could make out a tall figure in dark clothes, a hat pulled low against the weather, and she stepped to the side of the road, uncertain whether to flag him down or let him pass. The decision was taken from her when he slowed his horse and stopped a few feet away, studying her with eyes that were a startling shade of blue in a sun-weathered face. "You look like you could use some help, miss," he said, and his voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that made you think of safety and solid ground beneath your feet. Marlena tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard, and she could only nod miserably. The rider swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, and she saw that he was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of a man who made his living with his body rather than his mind. He could not have been much older than her own 22 years, perhaps 25 or 26 at most, and there was something in his face that spoke of kindness beneath the weathered exterior. "You are half frozen," he said, and without waiting for permission, he shrugged out of the heavy coat he wore and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped her immediately, carrying with it the scent of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" "I was," she started, then stopped, unsure how to explain the humiliation of what had happened. "I was left here. By my husband. My former husband, I suppose I should say." The cowboy's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in those blue eyes, but when he spoke, his voice remained gentle. "Any man who would leave a woman stranded in weather like this does not deserve the title of husband. Come on, you need to get warm before you catch your death. Can you ride?" Yes, Marlena managed, though in truth she had only ridden a handful of times in her life. The cowboy seemed to sense her uncertainty because he swung back into the saddle first, then reached down and lifted her up in front of him as easily as if she weighed no more than a child. She found herself cradled against his chest, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins, and the warmth of his body combined with the coat created a cocoon that made her realize just how close she had come to serious trouble. "I am Preston Vance," he said as he urged the horse into a steady trot toward town. "I run a small ranch about 5 miles outside San Angelo. Been in town picking up supplies, and I am mighty glad I took the road I did, or I might not have found you until it was too late." "Marlena," she said, her voice still shaky. "Marlena Zimmerman. I came here from Louisiana to marry Gerald Pritchard, but he turned out to be not what he seemed. Most men who send for mail order brides are not, Preston said bluntly. No offense meant, but if a man was worth having, he would not need to advertise for a wife like she was a piece of merchandise. You are well rid of him, though I am sorry for the manner of your parting. They rode in silence for a few minutes, and Marlena gradually felt the warmth returning to her limbs, though her feet were still numb in the thin shoes. She became acutely aware of the solid strength of the man behind her, the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, the way his arms sheltered her without being presumptuous or improper. There was something inherently decent about Preston Vance, she sensed, something that set him apart from Gerald Pritchard and his oily charm. Where will you go? Preston asked as the lights of San Angelo grew closer. Do you have funds for a hotel or family you can wire for help? No, Marlena admitted, and the word came out small and defeated. I used everything I had to come here. I have no money, no family, nothing. Preston was quiet for a long moment, and she felt him shift slightly in the saddle. I have a proposition for you, Miss Zimmerman, and I want you to hear me out before you answer. My ranch is not much, just a small spread with some cattle and horses, but it is profitable enough, and I have a house that is sturdy and warm. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting on in years and has been wanting to retire to live with her daughter in Dallas. If you are willing to work as my housekeeper, I will pay you fair wages, provide room and board, and you will be safe and respectable. Mrs. Chen can stay on for a week or two to show you the ropes and provide a proper chaperone until everyone knows the arrangement is above board. Marlena felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of having a solution present itself when she had been staring into an abyss of uncertainty. Why would you help me like this? You do not even know me. I know you were brave enough to travel halfway across the country to make a new life for yourself, Preston said quietly. I know you did not deserve to be thrown out like trash by a man who should have protected you. And I know that I need a housekeeper, and you need a position, so it seems like we can help each other out. What do you say, Miss Zimmerman? I say yes, Marlena said, and for the first time since she had stepped off the train in San Angelo that morning, she felt a small flicker of hope kindle in her chest. Thank you. Mr. Vance, you have no idea what this means to me. Preston, he corrected gently. If we are going to be living under the same roof, we might as well dispense with the formalities. And you are welcome, Marlena. Now let us get you warm and fed, and tomorrow we will ride out to the ranch and get you settled in properly. They reached San Angelo just as the first drops of icy rain began to fall, and Preston took her to a modest boarding house run by a formidable woman named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Marlena's condition and immediately began fussing over her like a mother hen. Preston explained the situation in brief, tactful terms that omitted the more humiliating details, and arranged for Marlena to have a room for the night, with meals included, paying for it himself despite her protests. You can pay me back out of your wages once you start working, he said firmly. For now, you get yourself warm and rested. I will be back tomorrow morning at 8 to collect you, and we will head out to the ranch. Mrs. Patterson will see to it that you have everything you need tonight. He left before Marlena could thank him again, and she found herself standing in a clean, warm room with Mrs. Patterson bringing her hot water to wash with and promising a substantial supper within the hour. As she peeled off the thin dress and washed away the dust and misery of the day, Marlena caught sight of herself in the small mirror over the washstand and hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangles around her pale face, and her brown eyes looked enormous and haunted. She looked like someone who had survived a disaster, which she supposed she had. Mrs. Patterson brought supper on a tray, thick beef stew with fresh bread and butter, and Marlena ate every bite despite the fact that her stomach had been tied in knots all day. The food and warmth and safety combined to make her almost dizzy with relief, and when she finally crawled between clean sheets and pulled the quilts up to her chin, she fell asleep almost immediately despite the chaos of her thoughts. She woke to pale sunshine streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from downstairs. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up with a gasp. The dress she had been wearing was draped over a chair, cleaned and pressed by some miracle of Mrs. Patterson's efficiency, and there was a basin of warm water waiting for her. Marlena washed and dressed quickly, finger combing her hair into some semblance of order and pinning it up as best she could without a proper mirror. Preston was waiting in the boarding house parlor when she came down, holding his hat in his hands and looking scrubbed and rested himself. He had shaved since yesterday, she noticed, and in the clear morning light she could see that he was actually quite handsome in a rough outdoorsy way, with strong features and those striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through to the heart of a person. "Good morning," he said, rising as she entered. "I trust you slept well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Marlena admitted. "Thank you again for everything, Preston. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," he said easily. "You are going to be working for your keep, remember? Now, Mrs. Patterson has packed you some provisions for the journey, and I stopped by the general store this morning and picked up a few things I thought you might need. Nothing fancy, just some practical clothes and such." He handed her a wrapped parcel, and Marlena opened it to find two simple calico dresses in serviceable fabrics, a warm shawl, sturdy boots, and various necessities that made her eyes sting with tears again. "Preston, I cannot accept all this. It is too much." "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said firmly. "You cannot work in a fancy dress and those flimsy shoes, and I will not have my housekeeper catching pneumonia because she is not dressed for the weather. Now come on, we have a ride ahead of us, and I want to get you settled before it gets too late in the day." The ride to the ranch took them through country that was both harsh and beautiful, all rolling plains and distant hills under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Preston kept his horse to an easy pace and pointed out various landmarks along the way, telling her about the area and its history in a quiet, unassuming way that made her feel he was genuinely trying to help her feel less like a stranger in a strange land. He told her about the ranch, how he had bought it 3 years ago with money saved from his work as a trail boss, how he was slowly building it up into something sustainable and profitable. "It is not a big operation," he said. "I have maybe 200 head of cattle, a dozen good horses, and I employ 3 hands who live in the bunkhouse. There is me in the main house, and Mrs. Chen has her own room downstairs. It will be yours once she leaves. The work is honest, and the pay is fair, and I promise you will be treated with respect by everyone on the place, or they will answer to me." "I am not afraid of hard work," Marlena said. "I have been working since I was old enough to hold a broom. My mother took in sewing and I helped her, and after she died, I worked in the textile mill to help support my father. I can cook and clean and mend, and I learn quickly if there is something I do not know how to do." "That is all I ask," Preston said. "Well, that and maybe some decent biscuits. Mrs. Chen is a wonderful woman, but her biscuits could be used as ammunition in a pinch." Marlena laughed, and it felt strange and wonderful to laugh after the fear and humiliation of yesterday. Preston grinned at her, and she noticed the way it transformed his face, making him look younger and more carefree, and she felt a small flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was just gratitude and nothing more. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a promise, a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running through it. The main house was larger than Marlena had expected, a solid 2-story structure built of timber and stone with a wide porch wrapped around the front. There was a barn, a bunkhouse, various outbuildings, and corrals where horses dozed in the sunshine. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, and Marlena felt another surge of relief that she had landed somewhere safe and respectable. Mrs. Chen came out to meet them as they rode up, a small, wiry woman with iron gray hair and sharp black eyes that missed nothing. She looked Marlena over with the frank assessment of someone judging livestock, then nodded once as if satisfied. "So this is the new girl," she said in accented but perfectly clear English. Preston told me you had some trouble. You look strong enough. Can you cook? Yes, madam, Marlena said. My mother taught me. Good. Preston eats like a horse and complains if the food is not hot and plentiful. Come, I will show you the house and the routine. You will work hard, but it is not slavery. Preston is fair and he pays on time. You will do well here if you are honest and hardworking. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Mrs. Chen put Marlena through her paces, showing her every aspect of running the household. The house was indeed substantial, with a large kitchen and dining area downstairs, a comfortable sitting room, Preston's study, and Mrs. Chen's room. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, one of which was Preston's, and the others currently unused. Marlena would be taking over Mrs. Chen's room downstairs once the older woman left, which suited her fine, as it meant she would have her own private space away from the ranch hands and even from Preston himself. She learned that Preston rose before dawn to work with the hands, came in for a substantial breakfast at 6:30, worked through the morning, returned for dinner at noon, worked through the afternoon, and came back for supper at 6. He was methodical and disciplined in his habits, which made cooking and cleaning easier because she could plan around his schedule. The ranch hands, 3 men named Dutch, Samuel, and young Tommy, were respectful and kept their distance, tipping their hats when they saw her and never saying anything improper. Mrs. Chen watched Marlena like a hawk for the first few days, correcting her methods and teaching her tricks for managing the heavy workload. Preston is a good man, she said one afternoon as they were kneading bread together. He works hard and he treats people fair. You could do worse than to stay here and make a life for yourself. I intend to stay as long as he will have me, Marlena said honestly. I have nowhere else to go, and I am grateful for the opportunity. Mrs. Chen said, giving her a look that was impossible to interpret. Just remember that gratitude is not the same as obligation. You owe Preston your work, nothing more. He is a gentleman and he will never ask for anything improper, but you must be careful not to confuse kindness with something else. Marlena felt her cheeks heat, but she nodded, understanding the warning. She was indeed grateful to Preston, almost overwhelmingly so, but Mrs. Chen was right that she needed to maintain proper boundaries and not let her emotions get tangled up in the situation. She was his employee. Nothing more, and it would be foolish and dangerous to forget that. But as the days passed and she settled into the rhythm of the household, Marlena found it increasingly difficult to maintain the emotional distance she knew she should keep. Preston was unfailingly kind and courteous, never speaking harshly or making demands that were unreasonable. He complimented her cooking, thanked her for keeping the house clean and comfortable, and showed genuine interest in how she was settling in. More than that, she found herself drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man himself. She noticed the way he was gentle with the horses, speaking to them in a low, soothing voice as he worked with them. She saw how he treated his ranch hands with respect, never pulling rank or acting superior, despite being the boss. She observed the way he read in the evenings, serious books on animal husbandry and land management, always trying to improve and learn. And she saw the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, a look that held something warm and wondering that made her heart skip in her chest. Mrs. Chen left on a sunny morning 2 weeks after Marlena's arrival, off to Dallas to live with her daughter and enjoy her retirement. Preston drove her to town in the wagon, and when he returned that afternoon, Marlena was alone in the house, suddenly and acutely aware that she and Preston were now living under the same roof without a chaperone. She told herself it did not matter, that she was staff and he was the boss and nothing would change, but she could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the air between them. That evening at supper, Preston cleared his throat and said, I want you to know that I respect your position here, Marlena, and I expect everyone else to do the same. You have your own room and your own space, and you are free to come and go as you please when you are not working. If anyone, and I mean anyone, gives you trouble or makes you uncomfortable, you come to me immediately. Is that understood? Yes, Marlena said. touched by his evident concern for her well-being. "Thank you, Preston. I appreciate your consideration." "It is just common decency," he said gruffly, but she saw the faint color in his cheeks and realized that he was not as unaffected by their situation as he pretended to be. The thought sent a little thrill through her that she tried very hard to suppress. Winter settled over the Texas plains with unusual force that year, bringing cold winds and occasional dustings of snow that transformed the landscape into something stark and beautiful. Marlena threw herself into her work, keeping the house warm and comfortable, cooking hearty meals that the men devoured with gratifying enthusiasm, and slowly building a life for herself in this wild, lonely place. She had been corresponding with a lawyer in San Angelo about filing for an annulment of her marriage to Gerald Pritchard, and the man had assured her that given the circumstances, it should be a straightforward matter. Preston had driven her to town several times for these legal consultations, always waiting patiently while she met with the lawyer and never asking intrusive questions about the details. His quiet support meant more to her than she could express, and she found herself looking forward to these trips, not just for the legal progress they represented, but for the chance to spend time with Preston away from the ranch. On one such trip in early December, as they were driving back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Preston suddenly said, "Can I ask you something personal, Marlena?" "Of course," she said, though her heart began to beat a little faster. "Do you regret coming to Texas?" he asked, his eyes on the road ahead. "I know it has not been easy for you, and I would understand if you wished you had stayed in Louisiana." Marlena considered the question seriously, thinking about everything that had happened since she had stepped off the train in San Angelo. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. What happened with Gerald was horrible, but if it had not happened, I never would have met you. I never would have found a place where I feel like I can breathe and be myself without constantly worrying about making ends meet or whether I will have a roof over my head tomorrow. You gave me a chance when I had nothing, Preston, and I will never forget that." Preston was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I am glad you feel that way. I want you to know that you have become important to me, Marlena, more important than just as my housekeeper. I look forward to seeing you every morning, and I find myself thinking about you throughout the day, wondering what you are doing and if you are happy. I know it is not proper for me to say these things, and if I have overstepped, I apologize, but I could not keep it to myself any longer." Marlena felt her breath catch in her throat, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "You have not overstepped," she said softly. "I have been feeling the same way, Preston, though I tried not to because I did not want to presume or make things awkward between us. But the truth is that I care for you very much, more than I should perhaps, and I do not know what to do about it." Preston pulled the wagon to a stop on the side of the road and turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense and searching. "What do you want to do about it, Marlena?" "Because I know what I want. I want to court you properly, with your permission. I want to take you to dances and church socials and show the whole town that you are the woman I am walking out with. And eventually, if you will have me, I want to marry you and make you my wife in truth, not just on paper like that snake Pritchard did." Tears spilled down Marlena's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I would like that very much," she whispered. "I never thought I could trust a man again after what Gerald did, but you have shown me that there are still good men in the world, Preston. Men who keep their word and treat women with respect and kindness. I would be honored to let you court me." Preston reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumb, his touch sending sparks of warmth through her. "Then we will do this right," he said firmly. "I will court you for a proper amount of time, at least 6 months, so that you can be sure of your feelings and so that no one can say we rushed into anything. And I will treat you like the lady you are with all the respect and care you deserve. Does that sound acceptable to you?" "It sounds perfect," Marlena said, And when Preston took her hand and raised it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles, she felt her heart soar with a happiness she had never imagined possible. True to his word, Preston began courting Marlena in earnest, and she discovered that he approached romance with the same methodical thoughtfulness he brought to everything else in his life. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers he found on the range or pretty stones from the creek. Nothing expensive, but everything chosen with care. He took her to town for church on Sundays and made sure everyone knew she was under his protection and interest. He invited her to sit with him in the evenings after supper, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. Marlena learned that Preston had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of four brothers, and had come west at 18 to make his fortune. He had worked as a cowhand, then a trail boss, saving every penny until he could afford to buy his own land. He had been engaged once, briefly to a girl back in Missouri, but she had broken it off when he announced his intention to move to Texas, wanting someone who would stay close to home and family. It had hurt at the time, Preston admitted, but now he saw it as a blessing because it had left him free to find Marlena. In turn, Marlena told him about her childhood in Louisiana, about her mother's gentle nature and her father's quiet strength, about how they had struggled but always had love and dignity, even when money was scarce. She told him about the textile mill and the exhaustion that seeped into your bones, about accepting Gerald's proposal out of desperation and hope, about the shame and terror of being abandoned on that lonely road. Preston listened to it all without judgment, his jaw tightening when she spoke of Gerald, but his eyes warm and compassionate when she faltered over the difficult parts. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met," he told her one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "To have been through what you have been through, and still have the courage to trust again, to open your heart again, that takes more strength than most people ever have to find. I am in awe of you, Marlena Zimmerman. I am only strong because you gave me a safe place to be strong," Marlena said, leaning her head against his shoulder in a gesture that had become comfortable and familiar between them. "Before I met you, I was just trying to survive. Now I feel like I am actually living again." Christmas came and went in a flurry of activity, with Marlena cooking a feast for Preston and the ranch hands, and Preston presenting her with a beautiful shawl he had ordered special from San Angelo, deep blue wool that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. They attended a Christmas social in town, and Preston danced with her 3 times, which was just respectable enough not to cause scandal, but clear enough to signal his intentions to anyone watching. Marlena wore one of the new dresses he had bought her that first day, and with her hair done up properly and her cheeks flushed with happiness, she felt beautiful for the first time in her life. The winter months passed in a haze of contentment, with Marlena falling more deeply in love with Preston with each passing day. He was everything Gerald had pretended to be, and more, steady and reliable and kind, but with depths of passion and feeling that surprised and delighted her. He was not demonstrative by nature, but the small gestures he made spoke volumes. The way he always served her first at meals, the way he made sure her room was always stocked with firewood, the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. In March, the lawyer finally came through with the annulment papers, officially dissolving Marlena's marriage to Gerald Pritchard on the grounds of fraud and abandonment. Preston took her to town to sign the final documents, and then surprised her by taking her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the fanciest place in San Angelo. Over roast beef and potatoes, he took her hand and said, "You are free now, Marlena. Truly free to choose your own path and your own future. I want you to know that there is no pressure from me. If you want to stay on as my housekeeper and nothing more, I will respect that. If you want to leave and make your own way somewhere else, I will help you do that. But if you want to continue our courtship and see where it leads, then that is what I want more than anything in the world." "I want to stay," Marlena said without hesitation. "I want to be with you, Preston. You are the best man I have ever known, and I love you with all my heart." Preston's face lit up with a joy so profound it took her breath away. I love you too, Marlena. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when I found you on the road, looking so brave and lost at the same time. Every day since then, I have loved you more, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. They were married in late May, on a perfect spring day when the wildflowers were blooming across the plains, and the air was sweet with the promise of summer. The ceremony took place in the small church in San Angelo, with what seemed like half the town in attendance to witness Preston Vance marry his sweetheart. Marlena wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Preston had insisted on buying for her, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Tommy had picked fresh that morning. Preston wore his best suit and looked so handsome and nervous that Marlena had to fight back tears of joy as she walked down the aisle to him. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Preston kissed her for the first time as her husband, Marlena felt a sense of rightness and completion that she had never experienced before. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she thought. Two people who loved and respected each other, choosing to build a life together. Not a business arrangement or a matter of convenience, but a true partnership of hearts. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. The ranch hands had decorated the barn for dancing, and Preston waltzed Marlena around the floor while their friends and neighbors cheered and clapped. Dutch made a surprisingly eloquent toast about how Preston had been walking around like a lovesick calf for months, and how glad they all were that Marlena had finally agreed to make an honest man of him. Samuel presented them with a beautiful hand-carved headboard he had been working on in secret, and young Tommy gave Marlena a shy hug and told her he was glad she was staying because her biscuits were 100 times better than Mrs. Chen's. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Preston took Marlena's hand and led her away from the crowd, back to the house that was now truly theirs together. He had moved all of her things upstairs to his room, which was now their room, and someone had filled it with more wildflowers and lit candles that cast a warm, romantic glow over everything. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Preston said softly, pulling her into his arms and holding her close. "I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy and showing you how much I love you." "You already make me happy," Marlena said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "You saved my life that day on the road, Preston, but more than that, you gave me back my faith in people and in love. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Their wedding night was everything Marlena had hoped it would be, and nothing like the disaster her wedding day to Gerald had been. Preston was gentle and patient, taking his time and making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. He whispered words of love against her skin and held her afterward like she was made of spun glass, and Marlena fell asleep in his arms, feeling more content and protected than she had ever felt in her life. The months that followed were a revelation in happiness. Marlena threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, adding touches of comfort and beauty wherever she could. She planted a vegetable garden and tended it with care, delighting in being able to provide fresh produce for their table. She learned to ride properly, and Preston would take her out on the range with him sometimes, showing her the land he loved and the work that sustained them. She came to know the cattle and horses as individuals, learning their personalities and quirks, and she understood why Preston found such satisfaction in this life. The ranch hands became like family, eating at their table several times a week and always ready with a hand when something needed fixing or a kind word when spirits were low. Dutch taught her to rope, and Samuel showed her how to identify different types of birds, while Tommy appointed himself her unofficial guardian and could often be found doing small tasks around the house to make her life easier. In late summer, Marlena began to suspect that she might be pregnant, and when the doctor in San Angelo confirmed her suspicions in September, she could hardly contain her joy. She told Preston that evening after supper, presenting him with a tiny pair of knitted booties she had made in secret, and watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure elation was one of the best moments of her life. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You are sure?" "As sure as the doctor can make me," Marlena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to be parents, Preston. In the spring, probably April or May." Preston picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, as if afraid he might break her. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "I am going to have a family with you, Marlena. I never knew I could be this happy. I did not know happiness like this even existed." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Marlena feeling healthy and strong despite the normal discomforts. Preston was attentive to the point of being comical, insisting she rest more and work less, bringing her strange foods when she had cravings, reading every book on childbirth and babies he could get his hands on. The ranch hands were equally solicitous, with Dutch building a beautiful cradle from oak wood, Samuel knitting tiny hats and socks with surprising skill, and Tommy practicing his lullaby, singing on the horses to get ready for when the baby arrived. Winter passed in a blur of preparation, with Marlena sewing baby clothes and Preston making sure the house was as warm and comfortable as possible. They spent long evenings discussing names and making plans for the future, dreaming about the family they would build together. Preston wanted several children if they were blessed, and Marlena agreed, loving the idea of filling the big house with the sound of young voices and laughter. Spring arrived with its usual explosion of color and life, and on a warm afternoon in late April, Marlena went into labor. Preston rode to town to fetch the doctor and the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, from the boarding house, while Marlena paced the bedroom and tried to remember everything she had read about childbirth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But finally, just as the sun was rising over the plains, Marlena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Preston was allowed into the room as soon as the baby was cleaned and wrapped, and Marlena would never forget the look on his face as he held his son for the first time. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, and his hands trembled slightly as he cradled the tiny bundle, looking at the miniature face with an expression of such overwhelming love and wonder that Marlena felt her own tears start anew. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we call him?" "I was thinking perhaps James," Marlena said, "after your father. James Preston Vance." "James," Preston repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son. Your mother and I have been waiting for you." Young James proved to be a good baby, sleeping relatively well and eating with enthusiasm. Preston was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes without complaint, and often Marlena would find him standing over the cradle, just watching their son sleep with that same expression of wonder on his face. The ranch hands were equally smitten, taking turns holding the baby and arguing good-naturedly about who was his favorite uncle. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that included the demands of a baby, but felt richer and more complete for it. Marlena managed the household with James strapped to her back in a carrier that Mrs. Patterson had shown her how to make, and she marveled daily at how full her life had become. Less than 2 years ago, she had been alone and desperate, abandoned on a cold road with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now she had a husband who adored her, a beautiful son, a home that was truly hers, and a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. As James grew from an infant into a chubby, active toddler, Marlena found herself pregnant again, this time with twins who arrived in the spring of 1884, on a day when the wildflowers were so thick on the plains they looked like a carpet of color. The births were easier than James's had been, perhaps because her body knew what to do this time, and Preston found himself the father of 3 sons under the age of 3. "We are going to need a bigger house," he joked, as he juggled 2 crying newborns, while James clung to his leg, demanding attention. But his eyes were shining with happiness and pride, and Marlena knew he would not trade this chaos for anything in the world. They named the twins Daniel and Matthew, and if 3 boys under 3 was exhausting, it was also filled with more love and laughter than Marlena had known was possible. The house rang with the sound of childish voices and running feet, and Preston expanded the ranch operations to ensure they would always be financially secure. He hired 2 more hands and began breeding horses in earnest, developing a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from as far as Kansas and New Mexico. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays and the daily work of raising a family and running a ranch. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and helping his father with the horses. Daniel was the adventurous one, always climbing things and getting into mischief, while Matthew was gentle and sensitive, preferring to help his mother in the kitchen or garden. When the boys were 5, 3, and 3 respectively, Marlena finally had a daughter, a little girl with Preston's blue eyes and Marlena's dark hair, who they named Sarah after Marlena's mother. Sarah was doted on by her older brothers and adored by everyone on the ranch, a bright, curious child who had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. Preston joked that he had no idea how to raise a daughter after 3 sons, but Marlena watched him brush Sarah's hair with infinite patience and read her stories until his voice was hoarse and she knew he was doing just fine. By 1890, the Vance Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the area, known for quality cattle and exceptional horses. Preston had expanded their holdings considerably, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and increasing their herd sizes. The original ranch house had been added onto twice, growing to accommodate their expanding family and the occasional hired hand who lived in. The 3 original ranch hands, Dutch, Samuel, and Tommy, were still with them, now more like uncles to the children than employees. Marlena stood on the porch one evening in late summer, watching Preston teaching James how to rope while Daniel and Matthew practiced their riding in the corral and Sarah played with a family of kittens born in the barn. The sun was setting in a blaze of glory, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, and the air was full of the sounds of life and happiness. Preston caught her eye and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made her heart skip even after all these years, and Marlena smiled back, thinking about the girl she had been that cold November day when she had stood shivering on a lonely road with nothing but a thin dress and shattered dreams. That girl could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. Preston had saved her that day, true, but what he had really given her was the chance to save herself, to rebuild her life on her own terms with the support and love of a good man beside her. He had given her his coat to keep her warm, but more importantly, he had given her his heart, freely and without reservation, and in return she had given him hers. As she watched her husband and children in the golden light of the setting sun, Marlena sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected turns life had taken, for the bad choices that had led her to the right place at the right time, for the kindness of a stranger that had blossomed into the deepest love she had ever known. She had been left in the cold with nothing but her dress, broken and afraid and alone. But Preston Vance had found her, wrapped her in his coat, and brought her home to a life more wonderful than any she could have dreamed. The years continued to pass in their steady, relentless way, bringing changes both large and small. James left for university in Austin when he turned 18, determined to study law and make his parents proud. Daniel took over more of the ranch operations, proving to have a natural talent for business and expansion. Matthew discovered a gift for training horses and began building a reputation that brought clients from across the state. And Sarah, their beautiful daughter, grew into a young woman as kind and strong as her mother, with her father's determination and sense of justice. Preston and Marlena grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and full lives, but the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with the years, becoming something solid and enduring, a foundation upon which everything else in their lives was built. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day, and Preston still looked at Marlena with the same wonder and devotion he had shown that first day when he had found her on the road. In 1895, James returned from university with his law degree and a quiet, intelligent wife named Catherine, and within a year, Marlena and Preston were grandparents to a beautiful baby girl named Rose. The house filled with new life and new voices, and Marlena discovered the particular joy of being a grandmother, all the love without quite so much of the worry and responsibility. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, a capable woman named Helen, who took to ranch life like she had been born to it. They built a house on the north section of the Vance land and started their own herd, staying close to family while building their own legacy. Matthew married later to a woman he met at a horse show in Dallas, an accomplished rider named Grace who shared his love of horses and quiet mornings. Sarah was the last to marry, waiting until she was 23 to accept the proposal of a young doctor who had recently opened a practice in San Angelo. Preston grumbled about losing his baby girl, but walked her down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes, and Marlena cried happy tears as she watched her daughter begin her own journey into marriage and family. The 20th century arrived with all its changes and challenges, bringing new technologies and new ways of thinking. The ranch adapted and evolved, adding modern conveniences while still maintaining the traditions and values that had made it successful. Preston officially retired in 1902, turning over the day-to-day operations to Daniel while he and Marlena enjoyed the fruits of their decades of hard work. They traveled some, visiting Sarah in San Angelo regularly and making trips to Austin to see James and his growing family. They welcomed more grandchildren into the world, watched them grow and learn and become their own people. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land and the life they had built together, because it was home in a way nowhere else could ever be. On a spring morning in 1905, Marlena woke to find Preston already up and sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in his hands. She poured herself a cup and joined him, settling into the chair beside his with the ease of long habit. "Beautiful morning," Preston said, reaching over to take her hand. "They all are," Marlena replied, lacing her fingers through his. "Every morning I wake up beside you is beautiful." Preston smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "Do you remember the day we met? When I found you on that road? Half frozen and scared out of your mind?" "Of course I remember," Marlena said. "It was the worst day of my life and the best day of my life all at once. The worst because of what Gerald did, but the best because it led me to you." "I knew that day," Preston said quietly. "The moment I put my coat around your shoulders and you looked up at me with those big brown eyes, I knew you were going to change my life. I did not know how exactly, but I knew nothing would ever be the same again." "You gave me more than your coat that day," Marlena said, her voice thick with emotion even after all these years. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a chance when I had lost everything. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never thought I would find. You gave me everything, Preston." "You gave me just as much," Preston insisted. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, building a ranch but not really building a life. You made everything mean something. You made me want to be better, do better, to be worthy of the trust you placed in me. Loving you has been the greatest privilege and joy of my life, Marlena Vance." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun climbed higher and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. The land stretched out before them, familiar and beloved, dotted with cattle and horses, crisscrossed with fences and roads they knew by heart. In the distance, they could see the house Daniel had built, smoke rising from the chimney as Helen started breakfast for their family. Closer in, the main ranch house stood solid and welcoming, full of memories and echoes of all the life that had passed through it over the years. "No regrets?" Preston asked, his voice casual but his eyes serious. "Not a single one," Marlena said firmly. "Well, perhaps one. I wish I could have known from that very first day that everything would turn out so well. I wish I could have told that scared girl on the road that she was about to meet the love of her life and build something more wonderful than she ever imagined. But then again, maybe it is better that I did not know. Maybe the journey is sweeter because we did not know where it would lead." "Maybe so," Preston agreed. "All I know is that I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, every choice, every challenge, because they all led me here to this porch, with you beside me and a life full of love and family and purpose behind us. The sound of children's voices drifted across the yard as several of their grandchildren arrived for a visit, and Marlena smiled as she watched them tumble out of the wagon and race toward the house. Sarah had brought her three youngest, and they were already calling for their grandparents, eager to spend the day at the ranch they loved so much. Duty calls, Preston said with a chuckle, rising and offering Marlena his hand. Ready to be mobbed by small people demanding cookies and horseback rides? Always, Marlena said, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. That is what being a grandparent is all about. They walked inside together, hand in hand, to greet their grandchildren and spend another day doing what they did best, loving their family and building memories that would last for generations. And, as Marlena hugged her granddaughter and listened to her excited chatter about school and friends and all the important things in a 7-year-old's life, she thought once more about that cold November day so many years ago. She had been left in the cold with nothing but her dress, abandoned and afraid. But Preston Vance had found her, wrapped her in his coat, and given her not just warmth but hope. He had given her his heart, slowly and surely, and she had given him hers in return. Together, they had built a life that was rich and full and overflowing with love, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The seasons continued their eternal dance, summer giving way to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring again. Preston and Marlena grew older, their steps slower, and their memories of recent events sometimes fuzzy, but their love for each other remained sharp and clear as the day they had married. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1910 with a party that brought family and friends from across Texas, and Preston stood up to make a toast that had everyone reaching for their handkerchiefs. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 78 years, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She came into my life when I least expected it, and she has been my partner, my best friend, and my greatest love every day since. Marlena, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that I took that particular road on that particular afternoon and found you when you needed help. You have made my life an adventure and a joy, and I look forward to however many more years we are blessed to have together. Marlena stood and kissed him to thunderous applause, and as she looked around at the faces of their children and grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, all gathered to celebrate their love, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction and completeness. This was what it had all been for, this legacy of love and family, this proof that even the worst circumstances could lead to the most beautiful outcomes if you were brave enough to trust and open enough to love. They had several more good years together, years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive, years of quiet contentment and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Preston's health began to fail in 1914, his heart growing weak after so many decades of hard work and full living. The doctor said there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable, and Marlena nursed him with the same devotion and care he had always shown her. One evening in late autumn, as the sun was setting in a spectacular display of color, Preston called Marlena to his bedside. His breathing was labored and his color was poor, and they both knew the time was drawing near. No tears, he said softly, reaching for her hand. We have had a wonderful life together, Marlena. More than most people ever get. I am ready to go, but I need to know you will be all right. I will be all right, Marlena promised, though tears were streaming down her face despite his request. You made sure of that. You always took care of me from that very first day. But oh, Preston, I am going to miss you so much. I will be waiting for you, Preston said, his voice growing fainter. However long it takes, I will be waiting. And I will still have my coat ready, just in case you need it. Marlena laughed through her tears at the reference to their first meeting, and Preston smiled that warm, wonderful smile one last time. I love you, Marlena Vance. Forever and always. I love you too, Marlena whispered. Forever and always. Preston died peacefully that night, surrounded by his family, and they buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch he had built with his own hands. Marlena stood at his grave and thought about all the years they had shared, all the love and laughter and occasional tears, and she knew she had been blessed beyond measure. She lived another 8 years without him, watching her great-grandchildren grow and the ranch continue to prosper under Daniel's management. She told stories about Preston to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive for the youngest generation who had barely known him. And every evening she would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, imagining that Preston was sitting beside her, holding her hand the way he always had. When Marlena finally passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1922 at the age of 87, her children buried her beside Preston on that hillside overlooking the ranch. They placed a simple headstone that read, Preston and Marlena Vance, together forever, and below that, she was left in the cold, but he gave her his coat and his heart. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through the family, and always maintained with the same care and dedication Preston had instilled. The story of how Preston and Marlena met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how one act of kindness could change everything, how love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, how the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures. And sometimes, on cold November evenings when the wind howls across the Texas plains, people say they can see two figures standing on the porch of the old ranch house, watching the sunset together with their hands clasped. It is just a story, of course, a romantic notion with no basis in fact. But the family likes to think it is true, that Preston and Marlena are still together somewhere, still watching over the land and the legacy they built, still loving each other with the same devotion and tenderness they showed for more than 50 years of marriage. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime, too powerful to end with death. Some loves echo through the generations, inspiring and uplifting everyone who hears the story. And the love between Preston Vance and Marlena Zimmerman. Vance was exactly that kind of love, eternal, unshakable, and absolutely true. The end came full circle in the most beautiful way, proving that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways to our greatest blessings, that the people who save us are often the ones we end up loving most deeply, and that a single act of compassion on a cold November day can change the course of not just one life, but many lives, rippling out through time in ways we can never fully comprehend. Preston gave Marlena his coat to warm her body and his heart to warm her soul. And in return, she gave him a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a family that carried on their values and traditions, and a legacy that would endure for as long as there were Vances working the land they had built together. It was, by any measure, a beautiful ending to a story that had begun in desperation and fear, but had transformed into something magnificent through the power of kindness, trust, and love. And if there is a heaven, you can be sure that Preston and Marlena are there together, still holding hands and still marveling at the incredible journey they shared, grateful for every moment and eager to share their story with anyone who believes in the transformative power of love.